That's why Emily's right. We need to think about the user stories. What problems are we trying to solve? What's the point of all this?
I'm so excited that Mark said Emily's right on recording because now I have that sound clip I can use at any point in my life.
I
You can
say
use it
Um,
as
that
a
all the
ringtone
time.
when
Woo!
Mark calls you.
Totally.
Emily's right. Emily's right.
I will answer that call every time.
All right, welcome to Ask Some Praxis on March 8th. Today's topic is loosely employee directory. So how do we find people we need to know about? How do we find out more information about the people we find and other associated topics? We kicked around a lot of ideas for this, and some of them are on the cutting room floor, some of them are in these slides. I think if you've been to this series of calls before, you probably know who we all are, but we each come from different angles when we talk about these topics, and you'll see those angles in quite strong evidence as we go through. Our colleague Julie is enjoying a lovely vacation, so she is not here with us today. So here's the agenda for today. We're gonna cover why user stories matter with something like an employee directory. We're going to talk a little bit about how the maturity model might come into play, where your organization might be in that sort of maturing level. People profile card and the richness of the information that it's got and what you can do with it. And then also, how do you surface people? What are different ways that you can put sets of people in front of your users in order to sort of fulfill some of the goals of the concept of a user profile, or sorry, an employee directory. So Emily, take it away.
So if you've joined us before, one of the things we talk about often are user stories, and we use them to define our outcome goals. An employee directory might be used for a wide variety of different reasons. So having this conversation up front and identifying who's using the employee directory, why they need to use the employee directory, and what they're going to achieve by using it is really important. These user stories then serve as your true north throughout the project for what capabilities you're building, any kind of hierarchy of information, what is more important than other areas. And then you could always use these different user stories for task-based testing to measure and ensure that you have built a solution that supports these needs. So let's
Yeah,
take a look. Oh,
I kind
sorry,
of
go
want
ahead.
to jump in that the whole reason we got the idea for this session was because a customer came to us and said, "We want to do this, this, and this. Can you all help?" And Mark's been doing this since employee directories were on stone tablets, and so that was kind of what this is, because this is a common need. So I like Emily's idea of saying, where do we want to go? Let's define that, because as you're going to see, there's a lot of different ways that technology can take us.
It's interesting also that people say, well, we have to have an employee directory, and you say, well, what does that mean to you? An employee directory. Yeah, and so that's why Emily's right. We need to think about the user stories. What problems are we trying to solve? What's the point of all this?
I'm so excited that Mark said Emily's right on recording because now I have that sound clip I can use at any point in my life.
I
You can
say
use it
that
as a
all the
ringtone
time.
when
Woo!
Mark calls you.
Totally.
Emily's right. Emily's right.
I will answer that call every time. So we have a couple of different roles in our first column. So you also want to think of the different people. A manager is going to have a different need than an employee. I also have some other examples here. Maybe you have interns or co-ops. Maybe people in different roles in different business units have unique needs as well. So just to go through a couple of the examples that we've seen, maybe a manager needs to find an employee birthday or anniversary, and that's connected to that employee profile data so that they can recognize important dates and celebrate. Employees want to find where someone is on the org chart. This is a huge pain point. The second you make an org chart, it's out of date. So having it automatically fed over and then being able to navigate it in SharePoint, for example, or wherever these profile cards appear is really helpful. And I think the most common use case of an employee directory is when we're trying to find someone's contact information to communicate or collaborate with them, their office location, phone number, email, maybe even availability. Now, the last two I've seen at some organizations when they want to expand their maturity in their profile information and they want to add things like dietary restrictions so someone can more accurately plan catering for a company event and order the right amounts of food in different areas. I've also worked in an organization before where we actually shared our preferred clothing sizes for like shirts and sweatshirts so that they could order the right swag and leave it on our desks for us. Of course, some of these areas are a little bit sensitive, so you'll want to align with your company culture of what information should be added to these. Now, in that explanation, you also heard me reference profile and people cards. They are the same thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more after the maturity model approach.
Not like Microsoft to use multiple terms for the same thing, is it?
Right?
Or use the same term for multiple things, so they get, they make up for it that way.
Or use a term and then change it consistently. So as we do with all of these asks and praxis things, we try and talk through a little bit from a maturity model perspective. There's no sort of wrong level of how you do something like an employee directory. And there are lots of variables that go into this: your organization size, your complexity, your geographic dispersity, et cetera, et cetera. If you're a 5-person firm like we are and you're using SharePoint, we don't really need a fancy employee directory, so search is fine. Our level of maturity for our employee directory is very low because that's totally fine for us. Next level up is you teach people what people cards are about. That the fact that there's an org chart there that they can traverse and go up and down the tree, and that actually all by itself addresses a lot of those user stories, or some of those user stories that Emily mentioned. The next thing up, maybe at around the level 300, where you're more of an established organization, you're a slightly larger one, is maybe thinking about building an employee directory with something like PNP Modern Search. We used to build them with the old search results pages in on-prem SharePoint. So this stuff has been possible for a very long time. The tooling has changed over time. Maybe the next level up at maybe at level 400 or so, you start to think about different embedded people searches based on where you are. What's the context? If I'm on the HR department site, maybe I have a search of an employee directory, but it's only for the people in HR, which is different than the user story for me finding somebody who knows about shrimp boats somewhere in the organization. And then finally, maybe in fact, we have some clients we've worked with where the organization is very large, very complex. Their specialized knowledge about their individuals in their organization is quite unique and different than what comes out of the box. And they have built custom solutions to help find people and resources and things within the organization based on those needs. So, what kinds of projects have I worked on? When, what was people who are on some, who are able to do something in the last 3 years? I'm making stuff up, but user stories that are very custom to your organization or sort of out of band from what you would get from Microsoft. And again, there's nothing wrong with being at any one level here. It's making the choice of where you should be, and therefore where, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be?
All right, so here we are, the people profile contact card. All of those words are used depending on where you're seeing it across the Microsoft 365 landscape. So here we are looking at it from the Outlook web application. And you can see at the top of the card, we have the employee name, we have their availability, and we have this opportunity to either send an email or a chat. And because it's showing their Outlook calendar availability, if they're in a meeting, maybe you're going to choose email. If they're available right now, maybe you'll choose chat. So it's giving you a lot of information to be able to act on it right away. And that's why we often use the people web part to surface these cards in SharePoint sites, for example. You can also see both files where you have permissions to them, where that person had created or modified it, or even sent it to you as an email attachment. So again, this could be a way to connect and see what you're both working on together recently as well. If we pop to the next slide, there's a couple more things that we can see. So this is viewing the card from the Outlook desktop application, you'll see there is a new tab there for memberships. So you can actually find out all the different M365 groups somebody has access to pretty easily. That can be really helpful if you're trying to permission something, but you don't necessarily have the admin access to see that. So you can get a lot of answers there and understand who people are working with and what initiatives they may be on. And then on the right, you can see more clearly see that availability that I was speaking to that was linked to your Outlook availability. And then you also have a section under contact to add your own notes. If you're at a big organization or you have a very bad memory like me, sometimes this can be really helpful. True story, when I first joined Praxis and I'm trying to learn all of my colleagues, they told me the names of their children and spouses, and I'm very bad with names, so I added it to my contact cards until I remembered them. So here is a way for you to put that information in context about somebody. And again, really helpful when you're at giant organizations as well.
That's great. Hey, Emily, we have a question in chat. Are these people cards available to external users?
Ooh, let me double check on that. I will get back to you before the end of the session.
I also have a question. Is there any way to security trim or pull groups out of that group membership thing? Like if I'm added to the layoff committee group, because we're going to do layoffs, is there any way to make that not show up?
I'm betting that it's filtered for, it's only public groups, and therefore as somebody who's looking at it, I have the right to know that exists. Private groups wouldn't show up there for that exact reason.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming there, and that's not always safe.
Yeah, you're probably right.
That's a good point as well about being sensitive around your M365 group names and level of discoverability there.
I keep creating groups at Praxis, things like, the Praxis firing list, and, names we can call Todd, and nobody has ever asked me about it. Maybe it's because no one's ever searching the employee directory.
Well, they never do it quietly. That's why it's public. I think of this because 100 years ago, when I was working as an IT guy, somebody was getting let go, and her manager was printing the severance package to a printer. And that person just happened to be printing something and had the queue up and saw the, John Smith severance package .doc pop up in there. So I'm always very, yeah.
To that point, very often when people first see these cards, they freak out because they'll see the files that they have access to and they think everyone else can see it. Just a big reminder that that is based off of permissions. So if Mark has Emily's severance package in his OneDrive, but he has not shared it with me, I will not see that when I go to his Peep card.
All right. Lots of fun snafus in the past, for sure.
And something that got announced this month is they're adding in pronouns. This is something that you'll have to turn on in your org settings before it becomes available, and it can take up to 7 hours to be enabled. If you turn it on and then decide you don't want it on, it takes 7 hours to disappear, and your data will only be there for 30 days before it's completely lost.
I thought you were joking when you said 7 hours, but then I went and read the instructions, and it says 7 hours, and they spell out
does.
7. It's not even the number 7. It's sort of weird.
Pretty specific amount of time, right?
Very
like
specific.
It's not 12, it's not 24.
But it's up to 7.
So this was one that I wanted to bring up. We talk about all the different things that show up in these people cards, and something that came up for a different reason with a customer here a few months ago, but works into this, is the ability to define things that aren't out of the box with Azure AD. And so one of the things that we see a lot is people want like birthdays or work anniversaries or things like that to show up in the people card, so that they can be displayed or searched on or whatever. But there's no facility for that. For us on-prem folks, we had ways of doing that. There was, we had the extension properties and all that, but there is a way to also do this in Azure AD. And so the link at the bottom there shows you how to add this custom attribute. Louisa Fries also has a really good blog post on how to do this. But what this is you create an Azure app registry. You add these fields to it. So in the example there, it's anniversary, whether they're an attorney, if they're in the test with John, that kind of thing. And then you can populate these values, and then you can use them to show up in the people card. You can query on them in search. The thing that I've used them for is dynamic groups. So now I can have a group called attorneys, and then whoever has this property set to true will automatically be added to that dynamic group attorney. And one of my favorite things about this whole bit is that there's no great way to do it in the UI, so you get to use PowerShell to set it all up. Woohoo! Steve in the chat room is asking if I'm referring to an AD extended or Exchange extended property. So this is Azure AD only. So Exchange Online has its own set of custom properties, and those show up differently in here. These are Azure AD, so you can do this. Again, it's an Azure app registration that these are actually bound to, so it is not Exchange at all. So this is a fun one. It's not obvious that you can do that, but once you know it's there, you can start thinking of all kinds of ways to use it.
All right, so this gets Todd was talking about getting the data into your system of record, into Azure AD. That's great, and you can actually pull some of those values into the people card. But if you need to get this data into SharePoint Search, say you want to use the P&P Modern Search application or Modern Search web part to pull together an actual employee directory, you need some kind of integration. Most of this data lives in a different system. So, your anniversaries, they can live in a system like Workday, or they could live in a custom application. The data needs to get into the Azure AD, or it needs to get into the user profile application. And unfortunately, the UPA does not sync custom attributes from AAD by default. So you need a way to get it over the bridge. And so what we've done for several clients really is we built, so we let the HRIS, or the system of record, connect and push the property to AAD. Then we need to build a lightweight Azure function that reads the properties from Azure Active Directory and then can populate that into the user profile attributes or application. So if you have, is manager, or the department location, or birthday, well, birthday is already in there. But you can get some of those custom attributes. You can get it then into the user profile application. Once it's in there, then you could.
So I'll jump in. So
Oh,
Mark Chrisman's
okay.
asking in the chat room, wouldn't it be likely that your data would go from your HRIS to Windows AD through Azure AD Connect, over the river, through the woods, and then into Azure AD? Maybe, but that's assuming an on-prem presence, which fewer and fewer of our customers are having. And then kind of what Derek was talking about was then there's another step where it goes from Azure AD into the SharePoint UPA, because that doesn't happen. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. I like PowerShell, and that's probably not the best tool for the job, but we've done that. And one of the things that we've done with that, so Derek and I were on a project a few years ago where that happened. And we had to kind of use PowerShell because the data coming out of Azure AD, while it was correct and factual, was not controlled by the people running SharePoint. And the people in SharePoint wanted to use it for audiences, and the data had to be changed, had to be, So then I just did that with PowerShell. I wrote an Azure function. It transformed the data on the way up, wrote it to the UPA.
And then we leveraged that data from the UPA to deliver search-based experience based on the user's department. We pulled out, I think it was events and news specific to those departments based on the user's AAD attributes. So, and with that, we can, speaking of the UPA, we got a question in our mailbag about the UPA retiring. Bringing out an old Monty Python skit. It's not dead yet. We have not heard that the UPA is retiring.
It's deceased.
So what I would say is, if anybody used the UPA in SharePoint 2013, 2010, it looks very similar in SharePoint Online, and I think that speaks a lot about where it's at. It's
yeah. They are making more efforts to modernize it, and we can see that with the pronouns. And I think that's the direction that's where we're gonna see the investment in sort of the graph level stuff.
So we already talked a little bit about the people card, but there's also a people web part. And the people web part is something that you manually curate. So for example, we almost always put a people web part on the homepage of a department site that has the site owners for that department so that people can get in touch with them if they have questions or input. So the people web part is that top section of the background image, and you can add that to the page, add specific people to it, and magically you get this rich sort of image of the person. Hopefully everybody in your organization has pictures, which most don't in our experience. But when you hover over somebody or you click on their photo, you get the people card and you get to see that information about them. So an employee directory, a lot of the old-fashioned user stories for an employee directory were, what's your phone number, what building do you sit in, all of that sort of stuff. That's just there. It's on the people card. You can see it whenever you need to. So that's a nice out-of-the-box thing that a lot of people actually don't sort of focus on. It's an amazing set of capabilities that you get for doing absolutely nothing except adding people to the people web part. One of the next things you can do, and again, sort of thinking about the maturity level, great, you've got all these people cards all over the place, but what if you want people to be able to, you want to be able to search for people? It's surprisingly, there's no sort of page you can go to that's a people search page, except when you go to the sort of general Microsoft 365 search results page, there's a people tab, but it's only at the organizational level. So if you're on the HR site and the HR site is associated with the intranet hub and you search for a person's name, it's not going to take you to that people tab. So oftentimes what we do is just add a quick link onto the homepage of the intranet that says something like search for people. And it goes to that / tenant name / _ layouts 15 search.aspx/people. And it takes you straight to that people tab. And then you search in the box up above and you find the people that you want to find. So that isn't a bad people search approach. At least you're giving people a screen that they can land on that is all about finding people. Everybody there, of course, can you can look at their people card or contact card or profile card when you hover over them and see all that information about them. And then a little bit more sophisticated, and we've done this in a lot of cases, is using the PNP Modern Search web parts to build your own sort of bespoke people search. There are layouts that are right. You have to install those web parts. You have to enable them on the site. But there are some capabilities that are relatively out of the box after that point to show information about people. So there's a layout in that search results web part, which is on the right side, that is known. It is set up to show people. We can add a search box at the top. We can add filters on the left that make sense for your organization. Here I'm filtering on job title only. You might have location, you might have shoe size. You can have anything that you've set up as being a refinable string or a refinable managed property in the search schema. And then the out-of-the-box local people results result source only returns people when you use a search. So there's a bit of gluing together here, but if you know how to do it, it's a probably less than 5-minute exercise to set up this particular page, and it's a nice starting point for making it even more customized if you need to. Now, the people layout that's here is that sort of out of the box in the PNP Modern Search web part, but you can use handlebars or adaptive cards to make that show information that means something to your organization. So for example, if I wanted to know what everybody's birthday was, and I had that data, and I had it stored somewhere where it was accessible and indexed, then I could change the handlebars template to show that piece of information as well. Let's see, we've got some resources here. I dropped an old series of blog posts in here because if anyone's still on-prem or they're using the old-fashioned search center in SharePoint Online, you can build an employee directory using that article. It's about 5 different blog posts glued together. The logic is still sort of helpful, even if the technology is a little bit older. SharePoint People Search right from your intranet homepage. If you didn't memorize that link, that's a blog post about that. PNP Modern Search is one of the best tools for your toolkit out there, and using it for some sort of employee directory is certainly a user story from this session. There's a link here about pronouns on your profile. And with that, I think that's all we have for today. Did we miss any questions in the chat? I'm going to take that silence as a no. All right. So our next session will be on March 22nd. We'll be talking about customizing and extending search, building a little bit on our last session, which was about, what did we call that one? Was that
search optimization?
Search optimization. We're going to take some of those concepts and go a little bit further with it. If you are going to any of these conferences coming up, you will potentially be able to catch us there. We're, let's see, Julie and Derek.
Just Julie is in Vegas.
Just Julie will be in Vegas at the Microsoft Collaboration Conference.
Just Julie.
Todd will be storming up, talking up a storm at Techorama in Antwerp, Belgium, in middle of May. Emily, Derek, Julie, and I will be at the European Collaboration Summit in Dusseldorf, Germany. And then Emily and I will go along to the Thrive Conference in Lipica, Slovenia. And then once again, Emily, Derek, Julie, and I will be at 365 EduCon in DC. So hopefully we'll catch you at one of those conferences coming up soon.
You have
and you can also.
We do have one last hand up. I want to just call it. Casper had a hand up real quick. You want to come off?
Yeah, it was just related to the standard Microsoft search. If you hit the People tab, you'll see a lot of people there which we might not be interested in seeing. I was wondering if you found some way to exclude those, because apparently I can't put a query in there, so I'm kind of stuck.
Are you talking about with the PNP Modern Search web parts?
No, out of the box, Microsoft Search.
Out of the box. It depends on how you're setting up users. So if you're creating a lot of users that aren't users, you will start to see some noise. That might be a good case for using the PNP Modern Search web part as a more primary search result, because you can control it more. But yeah, in theory, it's only going to show you actual people. But for example, we tend to set up a service account for Power Automate. Well, that guy's going to show up if
yeah, the only one I found is to use this hide from address list. The one we also use on standard SharePoint. That one is actually excluding those profiles from Microsoft Search, but that's about it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, make sure that if you have issues, I forget where user voice has gone to, but those are the kinds of things we should be asking them to either refine or fix. It's a bug, it should be a fix. All right. Last thing on that slide was, if you want to catch Julie and Andrew Connell at Cloud Dev Clarity, they do episodes, I think, every week or two. I should know the answer to that. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Yep.
But you can follow that link and get to their wonderful chats where they go into a lot of technical depth, not debt.
My God.
Technical depth. All right, everybody.
We are on fire today.
For joining us.
Thanks, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas.
you can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.